morning, Africa. Good morning, Nigeria. Good morning, Akwa Ibom State. It's a beautiful Thursday morning to rise and shine wherever you are. My name is Uyai Anekan, and it's a great delight to do Rise and Shine with you this morning.
And I'm Francis Oyumadet. Glad to have you join us. It's Thursday, gradually getting to the very last day of the month of August. I mean, I'm excited. I don't know, for some reason, I just feel like it's been a wonderful roller coaster ride the entire month.
Well, August was your month. You really anticipated the month of August. So by the time we go behind the scenes, I really ask you all of those things, you anticipated. How did they come through for you? But it's all good. We are thankful. The month of August is already gone by. Today's the 31st. By the time we wake up tomorrow, Friday, it's going to be the 1st of September. And we are already in a new month, the fourth quarter of the year, the last lap. And here we go. But it's been a great delight. I must say it's been a good journey from January to this time, doing Rise and Shine with our very lovely family. But of course, we are here again to talk Nigeria, look into the concerns of our nation, set the agenda, have conversations that can navigate the trajectory of things in our country. And we do not like to do these things on our own. We like all the contribution that you send in across all the social media platform, everyone who takes advantage of our phone lines, our emails, our WhatsApp number to send us via contributions. You are the real MVPs of Rise and Shine and of Spectrum Television. And of course, this morning we are here again to have those same conversations. But like I just said, you need to be up on the social media platforms, liking, sharing, commenting, turning on the notification bell on YouTube, just so that we can keep abreast with what Nigerians are really thinking, concerning the state of the nation, the state of Africa, and every other related issue.
Well, of course, palliative is still very much on the front burner across the respective state, and I know Nigerians are still anticipating some states yet to dispatch the palliatives from the federal government, and of course also the commitment on the part of the state government. Perhaps we'll start on that note this morning in the flash news back from Akwa Ibom State. We saw that just a few days ago we had the palliative committee set up by the Akwa Ibom State government, headed by Prince Enobonwa rather, who is the SSG to the state governor. Of course, a couple of other human rights organizations, the NLC, TUC, and other stakeholders. Of course, after the submission of the report, I highlighted a few recommendations, which of course also included payment of bursary, 4 days working days for civil servant, 3 months, extra allowance to help the civil servant, transportation to and back from work, payment of bursary to students, a couple of other things. And of course, in response during that event, the governor had said he was going to initiate a local government by local government project. And of course, we also saw reactions from Akwa Ibomites owing to the fact that the recommendations and the reports that were submitted to the executive governor did not meet all the expectations, did not cover all the areas. We saw retired primary school teachers and their next of kin also clamoring for the fact that they had not been considered in the committee of things. And of course, yesterday, I would say the governor literally just answered that prayer with the release of, 1 billion naira to augment the 2 billion naira that Akwa Ibom State has gotten from the federal government as palliative. And then, of course, also an extra announcement of 2 billion naira to settle the retired primary school teachers, both at the state and local government level.
I would say that the governor of Akwa Ibom State, in the person of Pastor Moino, has really put forward his best foot in the last 2 months. He's been, very proactive in listening to the plight of the people and moving in that same energy to attempt to assuage it. Because I remember quite well that it was on the 2nd of August that he released, I think it was about 2 billion or thereabout, for gratuities and backlogs to be paid to civil servants and retired school teachers also. And just seeing that yesterday too, he had appended his signature for some more monies to be released to pay up those backlogs that had been owed. I would really say that, the governor of Akwa Ibom State has put forward his foot in such a strong manner to, more like sharing the dividend of governance to get across all levels of government at this time. Of course, that is a conversation that Pastor Mono is very, very strong on. He has continued to say that, all persons across party lines, all persons across all kinds of pedigree must be able to enjoy the dividend of government, and, setting up these committees, making sure that the conversation gets around. I think it was in the PDP first meeting that they recently had last week, where he was saying by the time the palliatives come, make sure that no one attempts to share it, only on the lines of the People's Democratic Party, or on the lines of the people that were, directly involved in the election. These things have been sent for everyone. After all, the bite from the subsidy removal is not only affecting a particular political party, it's affecting every Nigerian, and we must be judicious in the distribution of this palliative. Now the conversation keeps extending. Are these palliatives even enough? The move that is being made by the state government, so far so good, as opposed to the perceived, wealth of these various state governments, highlighting Akwa Ibom, for instance. Are they doing enough? Are they doing commensurate to what, they should, people are expecting them to be able to do at this time? But releasing 2 billion naira in addition to satisfy, at least take to a very large extent the payment, offsetting the debts for the primary school teachers. That will be that's a very great thing. I know one thing we'll do will be to speak with the likes of Benson, who frontlines the conversation with widows and retired school teachers, so that we know how that particular community feels at this time under the dispensation of Pastor Moina.
Well, definitely, it's a welcome development. The fact that the respective community are being now taken care of. We had just the retired primary school teachers left out by the last count, looking at the recommendations that were made by the committee. So releasing this money definitely puts into consideration that other class of Akwa Ibom indigents who were not covered within the recommendations. But of course, it is still going to go down to the issues of, implementation. Yes, the committees as recommended will be set up at the local government level, and all the local government stakeholders will be part of it. But of course, we saw the governor talking about, the bags of rice, 50 bags of rice to go down to the respective communities. And it raises a question. Within these respective communities in Akwa Ibom State, how much can 50 bags of rice actually do for the teeming populace? And of course, still a question of, accountability, transparency, and, fairness in the distribution of these food materials. Because sometimes, when you go down to the interior communities, it is actually very difficult to recognize, not difficult rather, to recognize the poorest of the poor. But then taking the stress to go down to these people, oftentimes the logistics and the people, trusted with our responsibility becomes a problem. So we do hope that, in line with the directive of Governor Pastor Umoino, in line with a spirit of fairness, justice, and equity, in line with actually making sure that this palliative gets to the most vulnerable in Akwa Ibom State, just like it is meant for. We get to see these people who will form part of this committee not see it as another avenue to take back a lot of foodstuff to their families, another avenue to siphon or redirect government, palliative to their personal houses, or to their friends or colleagues or relatives. If we get to see that sincerity on the part of, those in charge of distributing the palliative, then we would say by the end of the day, we would be able to see a significant number of Akwa Ibomites who are truly in need, being reached with the palliative. But then, of course, a lot is still expected on the part of government. A lot is still expected on the part of, the Akwa Ibom State government. Remember, the federal government had announced 5 billion, and out of the 5 billion, just 2 billion has been released. Yeah. So it also means if the 5 billion had been released, probably we would have seen a lot more in terms of palliative being given out, because for instance, in Akwa Ibom now, we would have been talking about palliative worth 6 billion naira to be distributed to the people. But we watch and see how this is going to unfold, and we do hope that people, you know, saddled with responsibilities would do things differently compared to the NSAS or should we say the post-COVID era? It
should be post-COVID era. We also see the fact that when the federal government said they're setting aside 5 billion naira, so we may see that it's 5 billion naira allocated to every state, but it's going to be in the long run. So everything they will spend as to palliatives will be 5 billion, you know, in all of it. So we have seen that. Let's assume that this is the first tranche of, you know, the monies that have been sent out to the state governments at, you know, 2 billion each. Because I mean, everyone has come up to say, oh, we have received 2 billion, we have received 2 billion, and this is what we intend to do with it. We've also seen an attempt to be quite transparent with the process. But like you rightly said, let's see how far-reaching these things are. If you remember yesterday, we spoke to the police PPRO in the state concerning the youth protest that happened. We also saw the governor yesterday respond to the situation at hand. You know, he felt, but with regards to that compensation, the youths were saying, give us 3% out of the 13% derivation. Our guest had said yesterday, by the time the youth ask for 3%, the women will come out and ask for something. The men will come out and ask for something. The older generation will come out and ask for something. What will now remain for capital projects in the state? But well, we also saw the governor responding to the protest, and he assured that with the state government's augmentation of the 3,000 bags of rice and 2 billion naira so far received from the federal government, the 2,270 villages in the state should be hopeful to get 50 bags of rice each. Now, the governor warned that the state government has gathered intelligence on some persons trying to disrupt the peace in the state by inciting the youth to exhibit various forms of restiveness, including breaking into the rice warehouse. So it's more like the conversation left. Youth are clamoring for a way out of unemployment. They want their own share out of the derivative fund, to the fact that, oh, there are certain people that are instigating violence and using the youth as, you know, an arm to be able to execute these kinds of unrest in the society. Because this response doesn't necessarily cover what the protest was about, what the conversation of the protest was. Where do we jump from 3% out of 13% derivation to bags of rice being the answer to the question?
Well, a lot was said yesterday. Apart from our conversation with the police PPRO, I had to go back and listen more to people who were part of that protest, people who saw firsthand what happened. And it's unfortunate to see that as opposed to the reportage that we got earlier from the youth angle, the protest was seemingly hijacked by persons who were in different kinds of attire, chanting what you would call a 21st century, reenacted, or what you would call the olden days reenacted war chant. I mean, you can't go out for a peaceful protest and then you're wearing regalias and dresses that projects that you're going for war. It's a different thing. If it was an organized labor union that organized a protest and then you say, okay, these people were coming out in their respective uniform, you would understand. But as far as the National Youth Council of Nigeria is concerned, I'm only aware of one form of uniform, and that uniform has nothing near a pure white up and down and a pure black up and down. So literally seeing those kinds of uniform and possibly attributing it to some fraternity or confraternity that has been proscribed by the state government is a message of threat to the authorities in the state. So that means we can excuse the fact that the police actually saw reasons to come in and intervene in the protest, which was hijacked by the few criminal elements. And also, it raises a question as to the seriousness on the part of the youth, which part of the youth, which wing of the youths in Akwa Ibom State actually did organize the protest. Because if you're organizing a protest as a youth leader or as youth leaders across the 31 local government areas of the state, and then you find this group of elements in the midst of the protest. Now, courtesy, or should I say responsibility would call on the organizers to stop and ask selling questions. Who are you? Why are you dressed like this? And why are you chanting war songs? This is a peaceful protest, and you understand what peaceful protest means. Yes, you're free to chant songs. We want this, we want that, re-echoing what the protest is all about, but not chanting, war songs as if you want to go down and destroy everybody in front of you. So that was completely out of place. That was completely wrong. It was completely hijacked based on, eyewitness report. But of course, we know that going forward, I think one of the things that the governor also did was reading the Riot Act to the youth. So that is literally to reinforce and re-echo his standpoint that community leaders, stakeholders, politicians should desist from making comment capable of inciting unrest in a society. And of course, that people who do that will henceforth be considered as enemy of the state.
Yeah.
And if we have to maintain the kind of peace and, that we've felt, the relative peace, the relative security that we've had in the state, then we all have to be responsible enough to know that it is not just about our personal gains, it's about our collective gains. And like you rightly state, once there is something given out from the 13% derivative, maybe by cash transfer or whatever means it's drawn out to youth, definitely other sections of the society will come out. The stakeholders will come out. What if the persons who fought for this 13% even come out and say, you know what, we were the ones who suffered for this to come to Akwa Ibom State, so we want a percentage of it to be given to us as royalties for fighting a good fight on behalf of the state. So what is going to happen? Well, we definitely need to sit back and watch the system and watch the things that we clamor for. But be that as it may, we know that apart from asking for the 13% derivative, the problem of unemployment is really something that the present administration needs to look into.
Well, those are really, what would I call it, apt concerns that you have raised with regards to those issues. And then when we even talk about Nigerians stepping up for protest, you need to be sure that you put everything in place that, those peaceful marches, which are constitutional, are not hijacked and used for other things. But we'll just move on from that very story. And onto the next flash story, something comes to our mind. Yesterday, there was a whipping policeman trending all over, the media space yesterday. And I know my first reaction when I saw the video was, you are crying. But when you did, you perpetrated the action. Didn't you know that there were going to be consequences? Literally, those were my words the very first time that I watched that video. Of course, we see the Nigeria Police Force in Adamawa State vehemently reacting to the activities of some policemen who were caught on a video that went viral, with some vigilante within Adamawa State tormenting about 2 women who were alleged to be witches. They were tortured until they eventually died. Of course, this trending video captured the faces of the policemen involved, and the state government immediately swung into action. Of course, upon investigation and several other trials, as guided by the Constitution of the Nigeria Police Force, these men were duly, addressed with the issue. Of course, 2 police officers here, Inspector Ahmed Suleiman and Constable Mahmoud Mohammed, they have been dismissed after they were found guilty of killing 2 women, of course, accused of practicing witchcraft in Adamawa State, like I earlier said. We also see the fact that they were tried, like I said, orderly in the real system of, the Nigerian Police Force. We saw one of them being derobed. He has been stripped of everything that made him represent the Nigerian Police Force, and the other one is going to be, derobed at a later date, just following some more proceedings. But this is really, really what will I say, absurd in the first place. How is it that, beating up people to the extent that they die is a way to prove whether or not a person is practicing witchcraft? And when, in that kind of way, was it the duty of the police force to bring about, to ascertain whether a person was, a witch or a wizard? It doesn't really tally. And then when you see the tears of the policeman in place, you're wondering, where did you lose it in the course of all of this?
It's not about wondering, it's about people who have refused to get enlightened. is about people who are stuck in the ancient ways that was crude and inhuman. It's about people who are still backward in their thinking, people who feel because they are men, because they have powers, because they're protected by the uniforms they wear, they can do and undo. Now, the problem of witchcraft, say, or people being, tortured, locked away, starved, beaten until they die, or given some substance to take until either they die or they make it out of that point, is being a consistent practice across a lot of communities in Nigeria, and Kwara State is no exception. But then, of course, you're looking at the oddity in the fact that we now have a man or men of the Nigerian police force who ought to have been the knight in shining armor, actually rescuing those two women out of that scenario from the community people. Of course, if that had been the case, if these two policemen were acting in line with the code of their professional practices, Nigerian police, we would have seen a different scenario playing out. I recall growing up in my village, and the very first scenario I witnessed was that of a woman who was accused of being a witch. And of course, it came as a result of a little child accusing the woman of being the one who actually gave her, introduced her into witchcraft, say. And then there was this traditional, this plan to say if it's used to beat witches, they will confess. But of course, that myth has been in existence for a long time. It's been said that once a witch is beaten with that particular plant, the person is going to confess. But this woman was being beaten for hours, and not a word came in affirmation of the fact that she was a witch. Yet the beating didn't stop. Now, it took the intervention of a military personnel who just happened to, pass by at that point to put an end to that dilemma. Eventually, it was later discovered the young woman who had accused this woman of introducing her to witchcraft was very ill, was mentally ill. But of course, if that woman had died at that point in time, if the woman had died at that point in time, before the later discovery of the fact that this young little girl who accused the woman was mentally unstable, mentally retarded, what would have been the excuse? Of course, then we saw the family of the girl now coming to sending emissaries to the family of the woman, begging for forgiveness and all of those. But that could not have been prevented. That could have been a very late move if the woman had actually died in the process, which would have been the case without the intervention of the military personnel who happened to stop by. So these are practices that are deeply rooted in the fabrics of the society. Practices that you still find traditional leaders, traditional rulers who are still perpetrating this act. In Akwa Ibom State, I think in the last couple of months, there was a village head who was actually apprehended by the Akwa Ibom State Police Command for masterminding. I think that one was ingesting of fuel into the woman who was accused of being a witchcraft. So these are practices that people do and then go scot-free because it's happening in the interior communities, and people rarely get to see this. Enlightened people rarely get to see, or information about these occurrences rarely gets to the spotlight for people to see. So I would join Nigerians who are calling for not just derobing of these police personnel, but also let's see them going for murder, first great murder, for being part of that. And then, of course, those community members who were also part of beating these women should be arrested and brought before the law. And whatever the verdict of the court is, should be given out to them. Because if we do not get to a point where we normalize, people who take jungle justice or who execute jungle justice or who take the laws into their hands, we will not get to a point where Nigerians get to know that jungle justice, whatever form of, taking justice into your hand, is illegal, it's wrong, it's criminal, and people who are caught will definitely go in for it.
Absolutely unacceptable. It's good to see that the Adamawa, State Command of Police, we're very proactive with regards to this. We continue to have the conversation of how much reforms that we need within the Nigerian Armed Forces, especially highlighting the Nigeria Police Force. We saw the former IGP of Police, Usman Alkali, strive very hard to do this. Now we see the acting IGP Egbetokun also get on that particular saddle. Like we'd always like to say, you would get this thing right when you get it right in recruitment. You need to be able to analyze these people very well, get to know that they understand what the, being a part of the force in the country, what it actually means. What does it mean to be a policeman or a policewoman who serves within the force of the Federal Republic of Nigeria? You represent the country, to a very large extent. You are the face and you are the voice, of what justice sounds like in our country. So when we have people who undermine this system and the sacrifices of the good eggs within the force, then it's a big problem for everyone. So like I said, one of the best ways to get this right is at the beginning. When we are recruiting people into the force, we need to be sure that they are the kinds of people that we want wielding, artillery, wielding ammunition, representing the force and representing Nigeria. We must know that they are mentally fit. Like you talked about, one of the problems is that these people are not enlightened, and it's something we see very strongly in the force. We have very often time unenlightened persons in, as members of the lower cadre of the military or the Nigeria Police Force. There is no problem if these people sign up and are willing to go into the force to, serve the country. Once they come in, let there also be a structure within the force that makes sure that anyone who is not as enlightened and as properly educated as they ought to be in the force, there should be a system, within the Defense Academy that provides an education for these people, so that they do not turn out to be, another disgrace or, just bring these kinds of issues to the Nigeria Police Force. But that's relatively it for that particular situation. Of course, we've seen those videos this morning, weeping like he didn't know what was going to come if he was caught.
But of course, that is only coming because he was caught. Had it been he had finished what happened, he wasn't caught, he would have continued living his life like nothing really happened. So it's rather very fortunate, and we must commend the Kwara State Police for actually being that proactive. But of course, going back to the cause that you raised, I think the Nigerian Police Force, the Nigerian Police Service Commission needs to do a lot in terms of ensuring that training, retraining of its personnel becomes a daily occurrence. Because if we do not get to that point, then we already know that we cannot take away the fact that recruitment within the Nigerian police and other arms of government is always going to have some level of interference, some level of slot, some level of racketeering within the agency, unless of course the current investigations and probing by the National Assembly yields the kind of result that would put an end to the racketeering. Of course, we know there have been situations where people, gather money and then, pay their way into joining these forces, even when they don't have the height for it, they don't have, the basic requirement to join the police force. And then they stay within the force and then, of course, get to meet these things. Those insinuations, those allegations are there all over the place. But getting to have a system in place to train and retrain the men and women of the armed forces, not just the Nigerian police, would significantly, change the narrative. But heading back to another story this morning, since the swearing in of the ministers of the Federal Federation, we saw that from day one, Wike has been talking tough, and it seems that it's not going to stop anytime soon until we see transformation. Yesterday, we talked about the runway and the compensation to be paid to communities that have been affected. But of course, we also see that yes, and Wike has said that those who have destroyed the master plan of Abuja from what it was designed to be happens to be the elite members of the society. And of course, reiterating his standpoint that whoever is found wanting within the context of the master plan, whoever is where is not supposed to be, is going to definitely go in for it. Now, the Minister of Federal Capital Authority, Nyesom Wike, blamed members of the elite for distorting the master plan of the nation's capital. He spoke on a program with newsmen and said so many things have gone wrong in the FCT before his assumption in office on August 21st, 2023. The ex-River State governor said members of the elite are the major lawbreakers in the FCT. He said the master plan of the FCT has been distorted by privileged few buildings in reserved places like the green area. Of course, that is just another say. And then, of course, he said President Bola Tinubu must have seen his track record as River Governor before appointing him as FCT Minister. He said certain decisions must be taken, and only a strong-willed person like himself can take those decisions, no matter whose ox is God. Now, these are the conversations that we had prior to, just after Wike resumed office as the FCT minister. And a lot of persons had said he was talking tough, he was working on a landmine, and he needed, to look into the landmines he was working into, that at some point, President Ahmed Bola Tinubu might be forced to sacrifice him to save face or to still maintain relationships with the high and mighty within the highest cadre of society. But of course, looking at Wike's antecedent back in Rivers State, a lot of netizens, Nigerians, believe that we might be seeing a lot of, rivalries between Wike as a FCT minister and top, politicians, cross-boards who will be found wanting in respect to breaking the law and taking spaces where they ought not to have taken. But of course, many have also said, should Wike be able to fix those arrangements, it would therefore reposition the FCT back to the original master plan, and that would be in the overall best interest of Nigeria.
Of course, the master plan, it has been one of the strongest conversations that we've seen Minister Nyesom Wike come to the table with, and he has continued to say, that the FCT has to go in tandem with what the original design was. And of course, like he called out yesterday, part of the strongest issues is that it is the elite, it is the people who can afford to do so that are actually distorting the master plan of this, the FCT. I think it was, on Monday or thereabout, where we saw that a particular multi-million duplex was brought down because, people who could afford to encroached in on another person's parcel of land and went ahead to build on the structure when, there was this brawl back and forth. But of course, we also see that in the days to come in the FCT, with Minister Nyesom Wike there at the helms of affairs, he's going to be insisting that some of those activities don't go, the way it is. So it's more like no matter who's is caught in the wave of this, be an elite, remember that at the very beginning he said, if you like, be a senator, if you like, be an ambassador. If your building or your projects get in the way, of the master plan of the state, we are going to bring it down and restore order. But several conversations and responses still greet Nyesom Wike's approach to all of this. But in the long run, everyone is also waiting to see action that goes beyond the talking tough.
Well, actions that goes beyond talking tough is definitely going to come on the part of Nyesom Wike, looking at his antecedents. And of course, I think one of the biggest conversations we've had in Nigeria across states, not just the FCT, also over time, has been the fact that the master plan that was created for each of the states, each of the suburbs, has been, bastardized. People literally, money exchange hands, people overlook, government officials overlook things that should not have been overlooked. Building gets erected in areas that were not meant for residential buildings. Schools get placed in areas that were not meant for school buildings. Residential areas are built into places that were meant as green reserves. Commercial areas are turned into residential areas. Waterways are turned into residential areas. All of these things goes to distort not just the master plan, but also it's a time bomb. It's a ticking time bomb for the respective areas, because when people build in waterways, when people don't follow the master plan, you distort everything. And with one distortion, we can never measure the possibility of the risks or the hazard that will bring. So having to restore sanity to the FCT is something that many are looking forward to seeing it. But of course, is a conversation that can be spread across the respective states of the federation. I think it's about time for the elite members of the society who feel they have a way with all to actually lead by example, by obeying, the rules and regulations, by obeying the laws, by following the master plan that was generated and created for these respective localities. Because if they don't, long arm of the law is it's definitely going to catch up with them one way or the other. Someday you'll find somebody who comes in and doesn't care whether you were a former minister, whether you are a serving minister, whether you're a former governor, whatever role you've played, whatever position you've occupied in your life before then. And definitely that will now become like a war of the titans. And then, of course, most people would call it political witch hunting, when in reality, the person is just doing his job of making sure that, people who should not have in the first place even, conceive of the things that they have done within the environments they did it, should not have, thought about it. But we do hope that Wike is able to match word with actions, just like he did in Rivers State. But of course, also still coming from the FCT minister, we also saw that Wike is presently daring. He said he's yet to see a party chieftain under the platform of the PDP who will suspend him from the party. Now, of course, Wike also said governance is not about membership of a political party. All of this comes back to the statement made by the PDP chieftain that they did not approve, they did not give Wike the approval or the go-ahead to, accept being a minister under the Buhari's administration. And when you look at the narrative currently playing out and the comments coming from Governor Nyesom Wike, it begs for the question, really, at a point in Nigeria where for decades we've been clamoring for successive administration to differentiate between governance and politics, differentiate between electioneering period and the main governance process, where we were advocating for a scenario where you have, say, an APC leadership having appointment across PDP, NNPP, LP, and other parties in the country, just literally converging or gathering brains who have what it takes to contribute to building the Nigerian society, both at the federal level and at the state level. Recall one of the things that trended just after Pastor Mono took over office, when he also said he was going to appoint his cabinet members across board, was that people doubted the validity and the authenticity of that statement. Of course, after his cabinet was constituted, those concerns were raised again. And of course, he gave his excuse. But then, in the event that we are able to see, all the top contenders, all the good brains across party lines being brought in to work, and people, get to look past party sentiment. A lot of, development analysts have said Nigeria can get better, the respective state can get better, because then people will understand that it is not just about party, that parties are meant strictly for elections. After the elections is the issue of governance. And governance should not be, boxed up in party affiliations or because of party affiliations, where if you were not a member of the party, you cannot be appointed into, the present administration. And when this party is out, of course, all of those things has been, posited as one of the reasons why we have incompetent persons being appointed as a way of political settlement at the detriment of the Nigerian society. So I think at this point, in as much as there are a lot of, sides to the conversation between Wike and the Ahmed Bola Tinubu's administration, I think one thing Nigerians are excited about is the fact that we even have a PDP chieftain, serving under the APC leadership.
I think one thing that, Nyesom Wike has continued to emphasize upon is the fact that he is an unrepentant PDP member. Of course, he is a chieftain of the party also, and we continue to see him stand on that, on that fact. And then again, one thing he has also, emphasized is the fact that political parties are vehicles for us to be able to serve the common good of the nation. And at this time, he is primarily there as a minister to serve President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, not necessarily the APC or the APC government. But then you would, a lot of people are going to argue that is, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu not of the All Progressives Congress? Yes, he is, but Nyesom Wike has continued to reiterate over and over that he is in service to the president, and like you rightly said, at this point, it's not necessarily meant to be a story of which political party is here, because I mean the assemblage of ministers is meant to be such that we have technocrats and professionals across board being able to handle the activities of these different sectors and these different agencies. So it doesn't really matter, it shouldn't really matter what party these persons are coming from, especially if they can get the work done. For instance, when you're looking at some of those very professional sectors, for let's use health, for instance, if we were going to go by Ali Party and necessarily being, oh, is he from the APC, is he from the People's Democratic Party, then we will be undermining the need for someone who knows what to do in that particular sector being at the helms of affairs. So I know it's part of the in-wrangling still going on in the People's Democratic Party that has not been satisfied. It's more like the wrath of the People's Democratic Party has not been satisfied by the fact that, oh, Nyesom Wike and the G5 governors did not support the election process in the party, and then he has gone on after he had come out also to clearly say that he worked for President Tinubu during the elections, then coming again to be a minister under his cabinet. So there's still going to be a lot of question, but where this is riding is the attempted move by the party to say, oh, we are going to suspend you, and then he's saying, I dare you. Like, I'm waiting to see how that whole suspension thing is supposed to come about. Where is it going to come from? Where is it going to land? And like you said earlier, Wike is one person that talks tough, and it's not like we've not yet seen where he talked tough and then it went on that. He's been consistent with that body language and vocal tone. But with regards to is when you say he's going to be suspended, or there are permutations about suspending him from the People's Democratic Party, to whose loss is this going to be?
Well, for that to even happen, we have to talk about that when it actually happened. But for that to actually happen, you're looking at Wike's ward actually, being the mastermind as of that, because it will go down to his ward. And can we say that the ward that Wike belongs to
are willing to suspend him?
Is there anybody within that ward, the leadership of that ward, who will be willing to say, okay, we are suspending Nyesom Wike, the Minister of the Federal Republic, for anti-party activities? I stand corrected though, but I don't see that happening in the nearest future, because let's not forget in a hurry what transpired between the leadership of the PDP, where what's his name again, had to be suspended in Benue State as a result of going after the G5. So it's politics, and with politics, you're literally looking at who has exerted the most influence, who has been able to impact more. And right now, looking at the PDP and the APC, you're talking about a party that is opposition. And the question of even being the major opposition is still contenable between the PDP, the NNPP, and the Labour Party as we speak. Of course, looking at the position of Wike, even as a chieftain of the PDP, he has an extra advantage. He's also a serving minister under the current administration. So tell me, who wouldn't want to be in the good sides of Nyesom Wike at this point within his local government area? So that is definitely a very long arm for the chieftain of the PDP. That's something that I personally don't see happening anytime.
Well, he has said that the person who is going to suspend him, he hasn't seen the person yet. Of course, he reminded them of his antecedents as a chieftain of the party, all of the investments he has made, the works he has done, and the responsibilities that he has borne for the People's Democratic Party, and has dared any one from the party to take action and suspend him. But like you said, it's just Wike putting himself forward also. But we know that this might not really take any turn beyond the conversation that it is. But then again, it's a dare. You never know who wants to take it up or who's just going to say, let's allow this to slide. But of course, still talking several more things. He has emphasized that he is not working for the APC, but that he is working for President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. That has been the conversation with Minister Nyesom Wike at this time. But of course, we're going to be moving on from that particular story, and we will take something that touches to the hearts of Nigerians very, very strongly. The designer of the Nigerian flag, that very green, white, green color that means a lot to us as a country. I remember from primary school, we used to refer to him as Pa Taiwo Akinkumi, the one who designed the Nigerian flag. At the end of the day, he has made his bow out of this plane. Of course, information got to the media space yesterday that Taiwo Akinkumi, the designer of the Nigerian flag, had actually died at the age of 87.
Well, it's a loss for Nigeria, and I know that right now the federal government is mourning his demise, and even the presidency has described him as a legendary icon who has contributed significantly to Nigeria. And of course, his place cannot be taken out in the history of Nigeria owing to the role he played and his design. But of course, this also has raised some concerns about the Nigerian society. How many much heroes do we still have left? And what has been done in the lifetime of these heroes to actually honor them and encourage them? I know that I read an article yesterday that said, okay, now everybody, the Nigerian government is coming out to, mourn the demise of Pa Akinkumi. But what has been done during the time of his life on earth as the person who designed the Nigerian flag? How much of honor, national honors, has been given to him? How much of respect? How much of an influence or an impact did it make, or did successive administrations go for in order to also get to understand the minds of persons like this who were there before the advent of Nigeria as it is now? But of course, he's done his part. His legacy remains, and the contributions he's made will continue to remain in the history books, and we wish his soul a peaceful demise.
Of course, as a student in 1959, Taiwo Akinkumi entered into a competition where, of course, there was a competition set for the best Nigerian flag design, and it was his design that actually won at that, competition. It's a 3-line flag with green lines on the sides and white in the middle. Of course, that was in 1959. And that's how it came about. But the strongest conversation that we have had so far, continues to be how well was, Pa Akinkumi taken care of by the federal government in his lifetime. At the time that he was 78, he was placed on a salary of at least, allegedly so now, we are looking at approximately $29,000 per annum by the country's president, Goodluck Jonathan. I remember that it was during the, dispensation of GJ as president in the country that Pa Akinkumi was brought forward to give some honor with regards to designing the Nigerian flag. So it's said that by the time he turned 78 during the Goodluck Jonathan administration, he was placed on a salary that accumulated to about 4.6 million naira at the end of every year. We're also going to be asking questions about his living conditions, his health condition, where was he able to foot the bills and all of those kinds of things for, his entire lifetime. And then when we also see, you were talking about honor and all of that, when we bring those conversations about people that are put on the honorary list of the country. People get CON, people get this, people get that. How many of those kinds of honor did Pa Akinkumi get in his lifetime? So it's a very, very strong conversation. We'll continue to see now that he has passed. In what way will his, contribution to the face of our nation be immortalized, to keep remembering this kind of man in the history of this very country. Great work that he did for our country as far back as 1959, and that particular flag has been flying the highest it has been able to fly in all of these years. It's been a long journey. 87, we would say, in Nigeria, that he's lived a good life and has bowed out of display.
Well, he's indeed lived a good life. 87 is a ripe old age. I mean, it takes people who are blessed to live that long in Nigeria. I think we'll put a pause to the conversation here and head out to the news brief desk where Mary Joseph is waiting on standby to take us around the latest happening across the world. When we do come back, Rise and Shine will continue. Stay with us.
Spectrum TV, broadening your horizon.
Government, Secretary General, delegates.
Voting for Spectrum TV to recover 40 lives in County.
Very good morning to you and welcome to your morning news brief on Spectrum, live from Uyo. I am Mary Joseph. We begin the news brief with a report that the federal government of Nigeria has mourned the death of the designer of the Nigerian national flag, Pa Taiwo Akinkumi, who died at the age of 84 at his family home in Ibadan after a brief illness. According to a statement issued by the Minister of Information and National Orientation, Alhaji Mohammed Idris, the late Pa Akinkumi was a national icon. Away from that, the Lagos Rail Mass Transit Blue Line system will finally commence operations on Monday, September 4th, 2023, behind its earlier scheduled dates of March and August 2023. The Managing Director, Lagos Metropolitan Area Transport Authority, Mrs. Ambibola Akinajo, made the announcement on Wednesday when she conducted the newsmen on a guided ride and tour of the infrastructure at the Blue Line terminal in Marina. Meanwhile, the National Union of Local Government Employees on Wednesday called for an investigation and monitoring of statutory allocations to the local government council in the country. The union also declared the dearth of infrastructure and development in the councils, which it said has affected growth at the grassroots. The national president, Hakeem Ambali, stated this in an interview with our correspondent in Abuja against the backdrop of a petition filed with the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission and the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission by the chairman of Ijebu East Local Government Area, Wale Adedayo, against the Ogun State Governor Dakpo Abiodun over alleged diversion of council allocations. We head straight now to the foreign scene, where at least 2 people have reportedly died as a major hurricane that lashed Florida with fierce winds and torrential rains now barrels through Georgia. Reports say the hurricane Idalia weakened after making landfall in Florida's Big Bend region, but still poses a massive flood threat. According to reports, emergency crew are working to rescue trapped residents and clear debris. According to the power outage US tracking website, more than 470,000 customers in Georgia and Florida have lost power. And finally, in sports, following the colorful reception of the Cricket World Cup trophy on Wednesday in Lagos, the International Cricket Council has thrown its weight behind the Nigerian Cricket Federation in making the country the fastest growing cricket nation in the world. Nigeria is again among the 3 African countries selected for the trophy parade, along with South Africa and Uganda, ahead of the ODI World Cup in India from October 5th to November 19th. We'll have details of this and many more in our news at 12. I am Mary Joseph. Let's head back to Rise and Shine, where we have Francis and we are on standby. Do have a wonderful morning.
Voting for Spectrum TV to improve voting lives in Spectrum TV.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, of course, this is Rise and Shine, and we're coming to you live from Uyo, the capital city of Akwa Ibom State, Nigeria. We've been having several conversations already this morning, looking at very topical issues across the country. Of course, Mary Joseph also brought us tidbits of global news. But just a quick rundown of some of the conversations we've had so far. Of course, palliative conversations remains on the front burner. Several states have begun to make moves, distribute bags of rice. The FCT is one of those. Akwa Ibom State government released 50 bags of rice for communities. Of course, there are big questions as to how many people 50 bags of rice can feed in communities. Also, the state government in Akwa Ibom gave 1 billion in addition to the 2 billion naira sent by the federal government. But let's see how much these monies can help to mitigate the effect of the subsidy removal for the most vulnerable in the society. We also saw the fact that Adamawa State Police Command has dismissed 2 police officers who were found guilty of torturing to death 2 women who were accused of being witches. Also, as part of our conversations, we're around Nyesom Wike, Minister of the Federal Capital Territory, between his, loud boast on how he's going to handle people who are part of the distortion of the master plan of the FCT, and he's there to the People's Democratic Party to make a move to suspend him, saying he's waiting to see who that person will be. These and more are some of the conversations we've had so far. We also see the fact that the designer of the Nigerian flag, Taiwo Akinkumi, died at the age of 87. Of course, after having a very long, good life here on earth and giving us one of our nation's iconic pieces. And that's the much we have taken so far on Rise and Shine. For you to catch up on all that, you need to follow us across all social media platforms. Take advantage of our website at www.SpectrumTV.ng, and you can watch us real time wherever you are, whenever you want to. At this point, we'll be, taking on some more conversations, looking at the spate of coups in Africa. It's becoming like a daily news. It's more like you're waiting who's next, and where is it happening next, what's it happening next. I think the very funny twist to all of these cool conversations now is the proactive steps that some other African leaders are taking with regards to reshuffling their cabinet and their military ranks, just to make sure they don't fall prey to this next. But how much saving can this reshuffling bring? But let's go to the very top on the Gabon coup.
Well, of course, we know that Gabon coup has resurrected. We had the Prime Minister, the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, speaking with Nigerian President Ahmed Bola Tinubu, who is also the chairman of the ECOWAS, and of course, reiterating the fact that democracy must be seen as a priority in the continent. But of course, these concern spirals in multiple ways. You're talking about the fact that democracy must be seen and must be protected. But there, of course, the Gabon military coup has generated a couple of reactions. We saw video footages of the people of Gabon celebrating the military coup rather than, be sad about the scenario. And that, poses a whole lot of question. Why would we have people celebrating the military takeover in Gabon? Gabon has been seen as one of the richest, oil countries in Africa. But of course, when you look at the development in Gabon and place it side by side with the wealth that has been entrusted to the land, it seems that it's not been commensurate. And you're looking at a president who has been in power for more than 14 years, and of course still counting, and then a family that has ruled a country for up to 50 years. It's literally more or less like a dynasty of family, successive administration, from father to son, from son to grandson, from grandson to great-grandson, and the list just keeps going on. I mean, we know that part of the news that we got within the heels of the Gabon, military coup was that one of Ali Bongo's son was actually arrested and charged over charges of, treason. So it definitely means as the father is still in charge, the son is within the corridors of power, meaning the likely possibility of the son being the one to take over from the father is still there. Now, many people have said if democracy is actually what is being practiced in Africa, within the African continent, then we need to go sit down and look at how democracy, is being practiced in the West. How many Western countries do we have one president sitting for more than 2 terms and still counting? How many Western countries do we have, a family, successively leading the country for decades? We've not seen that happening. Even if we see that happening, it's basically because the people get to entrust this confidence on these people, maybe because of, antecedents or how much these individuals have been able to put themselves forward for the acceptability of the people. So a lot of questions surrounds it. But of course, one of the greatest conversations around this is if we're going to have what the Canadian Prime Minister's requested actually happening in the sub-Saharan African continent, we need to get to a point where our leaders understand that the countries, the people are tired of having leaders upon leaders, having, this wealth of natural resources in abundance. Yet, when you look at the infrastructural development, when you look at the living standard of the people, when you look at the indices coming out from all of these African countries, it does not measure up to the wealth that we see in these respective countries. Now, when we get to have that conversations and ECOWAS is able to, pinpoint and prioritize the question of good governance on the part of the respective leaders on the respective countries, then we will get to a point where military coup would not even be a thing that is being considered. Because until people begin to feel dissatisfied, until people feel like they have the abundance of resources, but they are not seeing the result, they're not seeing the impact of the wealth that has been entrusted to them, and until question of embezzlement, stealing from the public treasury, misappropriation of funds, bad governance, poor infrastructural development, and all of the other decays that have been seen within the African continent is addressed by the respective leaders, we might not see this, going out anytime soon.
Part of the very serious conversations we're having around this is because, like you said, families making a dynasty out of democracy in a particular country. We don't see that in more developed nations, except you're choosing another style of governance that is not democracy. And so I think it was yesterday someone was saying, are we now, edging closer to a time where we're going to be having militocracy in Africa, a merger of military and democratic rule happening side by side in the country. And I think that if it's understudied this very well, you realize that with the coup in Niger and that the one that just happened yesterday in Gabon, you realize that the citizens are more in celebratory mode than they are afraid or worried that these coups are happening in their country. Like Francis rightly said, it enunciates a lot of concerns. There's something for us to be looking into. For instance, in the case of Niger, the coup is said to ECOWAS, you people are not even listening to the main conversation. You're not asking the right questions as to why exactly did we decide to take over power, and why do you have citizens celebrating but yet you want to move in a swing of military intervention to come and help. Let's see, why are the citizens celebrating? In Gabon, citizens are also celebrating that this coup has happened in the first place. Let's not forget that last week an election took place in Gabon where we saw the current president of the country, Ali Bongo, still winning that election after sitting on that particular seat for several years. And now the election is said to have been marred by a lot of irregularities. First of all, the presence of international observers was not, paramount in that election, and there were snippets of and pockets of reports about inconsistencies with the way the election was carried out. The opposition, that even came up to the 64.27% of vote that Ali Bongo, got out of the election, also are refuting the result of that particular election. So it's more like the country was waiting. it takes me back to the conversation. It brings my mind back to the conversation around Nigeria. It's more like the citizens want one thing, and then the electorate delivered another thing. But at this point, both the citizens and the military of the country are saying we're not going to sit on our behind and watch this continue in our country. And I think part of the things that is really, really informing coups in Africa is extended stay of governance. I think it was in the name of the country skips me now, but a referendum was sent out in the entire country to extend the leadership term of a democratically elected president. And from the results of that referendum, it's more like, you know, the citizens unanimously agreed. Now we do not know if those, you know, if those numbers were also altercated by any parties involved, but it was more like the citizens came out to say, oh yes, we want, you know, the timing, how long a person spends in the presidency to be extended. You can keep coming and keep coming. That was the result they got for the referendum. Was it honest and transparent? Did it, you know, bring to bear the real desires of the people? Now that's another question. But when we keep seeing in African countries a particular family doing 40 years, doing 30 years, doing 50 years, and sometimes you see sons ousting their fathers, or a father is killed and a child takes over governance. Is that really democracy? I mean, democracy is about electing people for the people, by the people, into the offices. So this is a problem. And now when we see the likes of Ali Bongo now coming out and calling on, you know, fellow African leaders to come in and wade into the situation, come and talk to the Coupies leaders, we need to talk about the lethargy that comes in when someone has overstayed their welcome in a particular public office. Are you able to hold them accountable to the dictates of that office? Are they willing to do right by the office and do right by the people, having stayed there for decades? There's a lethargy that comes, you're just like, oh, it now becomes a routine. No, you're not proactive with regards to handling the issues of the country. Why don't you give this responsibility to fresh hands and all of that? Even when you want to, you know, take a swipe at the monarchical system of governance, that you can, you know, we would say, oh, the UK has something in place. You see that what the monarch does for the United Kingdom is different from the structured systems where you have the Prime Minister and other parliament members running the day-to-day activities of these nations that are first world orders. So if Africa is going to, you know, get this right, we need to start having the conversations as to what leadership style do we really want to have on this continent and run by. When we saw the Canadian Prime Minister Julius coming out to say that democracy is a priority, protecting democracy should be a priority in Africa. But I think that African leaders and Africans need to come out and have a conversation and deliberate on what, you know, system of governance they deem fit for the continent.
Well, definitely that is something that the ECOWAS leadership needs to address, needs to look into, because you can't continue talking about the problem without looking at the causes of the problem. You can't think you would profile a solution to a problem without addressing the root cause. Now, what are the root cause of the military coups we are beginning to see in Africa? It is, you know, a leadership problem. It's a leadership crisis. Is underdevelopment. It's people saying that they have the wealth, but the leaders are mismanaging the wealth that should have brought, you know, development to everyone.
The people.
So people see this happening. Eventually, you know, everybody gets to that elastic limit where they can no longer be stretched. And when you push people to the wall, the adverse effect of that is that they're going to react, and the reaction is going to be to bounce back. Now, in this context, you have the military reacting and the people supporting. But we might get to a point where the people react and the military support. Because when people get too tired, which of course has gotten to that point in the African continent, it's not going to be business as usual. In Nigeria, we are currently having, you know, those scenario playing out in the lower court. But of course, we know that unless these issues are addressed, we might not see a difference in the trends that is currently going. I know that some, you know, presidents of other countries are beginning to take proactive measures. We have the Cameroon president talking about Biya, Paul Biya, the Cameroonian president, who, by the way, has served for, I think, within 21 or 22 you know, years in office since 1982. So you're looking at somebody that is 90 years old, has served in that same position for almost 22 years. and he's not still ready to let go. Now we see that President Paul Biya has reshuffled his military commanders, and of course he's been in power since 1982. The key changes in the country's Ministry of Defense comes as after the coup in Gabon. It's very important to note that Biya is Africa's second longest reigning president, the world's oldest non-royal national leader, the oldest head of state in the world, and the oldest president in Africa. Now, look at the statistics. Look at the scenario playing out. The oldest in the whole of Africa, 90 years. What is a 90-year-old still doing in the seat of power? What is a 90-year-old still doing after 22 years of sitting in the same position? And we are not even talking about a dynasty or a traditional, leadership or monarchy that you say, okay, this is the tradition of the Cameroon people. You're talking about democracy. So how is it that, it goes back to the conversation of understanding what the Constitution really is. Because it seems the African countries, the African continent, literally picks just an excerpt of what works for them within democracy that is being practiced in the West, and then practices it. Because I'm yet to see any Western, country that has twisted its constitutions to favor the people in power. When people sit at the National Assembly, the legislators across these African countries, you're looking at people just manipulating the law to favor their interests, to favor their intent, to favor their whims and caprices. When we continue to see this happening across African countries, one way or the other, the ECOWAS, the AU, all the other organizations need to understand that one day the people are going to rise up. And when the people rise up, there is literally nothing the people in power would do, because the power in the people is far greater than the power in the hands of people in power. So the conversation, if ECOWAS, led by Ahmed Bola Tinubu, if the African Union, the Commonwealth organization wants to put an end to military coup in the continent, they need to rise up unanimously. Look at the problem of leadership, and that goes down to legislations, ensuring that if we're going to have one tenure of 5 years, if we're going to have 2 tenures of 4 years, that is enshrined in the Constitution across all the member states, not just limited to one country. Now, when you have that across all the member states, every country in Africa understands that it is democracy. Democracy has its guidelines, it has its principles, and those principles will be implemented. No one president in one particular country is going to sit down and alter the provisions of the law through the legislature to extend his stay in office. No president is going to practice something different from what is obtainable. Now, when we have this uniformity across the member state, then we'll get to understand that, okay, ECOWAS is serious, the Commonwealth is serious, African Union is serious to understand, prioritize governance, prioritize democracy, and of course, this must fall within the best practices of what democracy is. You can't have democracy on one hand and then have a monarchy on the other hand, or have another system of government on the other hand. One way or the other, this is like, I think one of our guests said, this is like a plague. Once it starts, it's gradually eating down. And we might get to a point where all African countries, if care is not taken, if the problem is not addressed now, that is beginning to spiral out, not even the proactive measures that Paul Biya is taking is going to help matters.
Would you really say that these are proactive measures? These measures will be, could be stemmed basically from greed, because we also see President of Rwanda retire 12 generals, 1,013 other military officers amid coups in Africa. Why are presidents moving, to reshuffle their military ranks and military officials in the midst of, the spate of coups happening in Africa? You need to first of all ask yourself a question. If you're doing right by democracy and you're doing right by the citizens, you should fear no harm. I think it's the Bible that says that people run when there's no one chasing them. There's nobody chasing you, but you're already beginning to run. Because if you look at the Constitution, for instance, in Rwanda now, have you elected, did you bring on new people, like we say in the case of Nigeria, where once a new leader in the military rank is appointed, anyone who's on his rank is going to be forcefully retired? Is this what happened in Rwanda, or you just looked into Africa and you see what is happening? I mean, we just woke up yesterday and we heard Gabon was, had been ousted. The president has been ousted. So the Cameroon president is saying, who knows if we are next. Yes, and Rwandan president is saying, who knows if I'm next. And next thing you're seeing, 12 generals are retired, 1,013, others are also retired amid this.
You know the twist that might possibly happen here, yeah? These president, Biya, and these two presidents who seem to be taking proactive measures, because by their measures, they're taking proactive measures to prevent, military coup in their respective countries.
Yeah.
But what they forget is that, as far as the rank and files of the military are concerned, once the mine is instituted into one person, the entire military will join, no matter the ranks of that person. And even if you've retired the top cadre that you think might be
What's the guarantee that they had not had this conversation and ran it down through all of the ranks?
Okay, so now that is one. What's the guarantee? And don't forget, even if by constitution or by whatever means, people who are supposed to spearhead coups should be of a particular rank within the military, promotions can be done at the flip of the fingers. It's just a matter of somebody declaring, I am this, and promotions are done. Don't forget, in the militaries across Africa, we've seen scenarios where, somebody's just picked from the lowest rank and promoted, 3, 4, 5 ranks ahead, as opposed to what is obtainable. So we can see this. The best way for leaders across Africa to prevent further military coups is to look into the issue of democracy, the ethics of, the values of true democracy, the value of real true governance, providing true dividends of democracy to the people, managing the resources of the people diligently and efficiently to give to the people all-round development. When we get these problems solved, military coups would disappear. The military personnel would do their job of protecting the, territorial sovereignty, protecting lives and properties, and all of the other constitutional duties that is, accrued to them.
Yeah. Still, to land this conversation in terms of measures that we can use to actually mitigate coups in Africa. Of course, there was a conversation that held between the leader, the chairman of the ECOWAS, being the president of Nigeria, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and the prime minister of Canada, being Justin Trudeau. Of course, we saw these activities happening amongst them, and then we are having conversation, what can we actually do to make sure that, democracy is preserved in Africa? What are the conversations that we can have? And some of those things are, some of the conversations you've already enumerated. Let us have constitutional input as to how long a person can spend on the saddle of responsibility this morning. How long a person can spend in the saddle of responsibility as president of any African country. And also, I think we also see that how can you get, citizens duly involved in the process of democracy? If we say that democracy is government of the people, for the people, and by the people, we need to see how, leaders and governments can make sure that people are involved toe to toe with what happens in democracy, which brings us to the fact that transparency must be a core part of democracy. And when we're talking about Gabon, for instance, Gabon is one of the richest oil nations that we have in the world, not just in Africa, but they are one of the poorest countries that we have on earth. Why is it so? Why are we consistently rich as a continent yet so poor at the same time? We have, several mineral resources at our disposal, but yet we cannot, we don't have the intelligence, the leadership will to be able to take advantage of some of these things. So this is a major, major problem, of course. And having our political leaders to discuss this crisis will also help, because when you say ECOWAS has met or the African Union has met, what have been the topics of conversation amongst them? so far? What have they been talking about for us to be able to know that, okay, this is what they've decided, this is how they wanted to handle it? Because when you take our minds back to the conversation between, the ECOWAS and trying to mitigate the coup in Niger, it was just more like, okay, we've partly heard you, but we are telling you that if this negotiation does not go through, we are still going to move in with the military. But on the table of conversation, how are you moving to address the issues that are happening in the country, on the continent?
Well, that's still the conversation that these leaders would need to look into. And I still maintain my initial stand. Until we see leaders within the ECOWAS bloc, leaders within the African continent, the African Union, the Commonwealth of Nations, prioritizing, the values of democracy, the constitutions that are put forward by democracy value the authority and power, transparency, fairness, justice within the institutions of governments that are tools for democracy to thrive in the respective country. We will get to that point. Until we get to a point where elections are conducted and the people consistently, the people's views in terms of how much people voted tallies with, what we see in the election results that are being reeled out by the election umpires in this respective country, then of course the problem will still continue. But I'm sure hoping that the leaders from the ECOWAS, from the AU, the Commonwealth will look into these multiple problems, the root cause of all of these military coups, and address them holistically. When we do that, then we'll see Africa, the African continent, rising from its poverty stage, poverty status, to becoming a developed nation. And of course, that will stand its place toe-to-toe with other developed countries. But until then, until our leaders are ready to see, those changes done, then of course we might still see military coups happening across. But I think this is where we're going to draw the pause in this conversation, and then a short time out. When we do come back, Rise and Shine will continue. Stay with us.
Welcome back and thanks for staying tuned. This is still Rise and Shine, and we're coming to you live from Uyo, the capital city of Akwa Ibom State, Nigeria. We've had several conversations worthy of note, looking at strong issues happening in Nigeria, looking at strong issues happening on the continent. Of course, coup seems to be taking a strong trend now on the continent, and just this morning we've seen that two African leaders in Cameroon and in Rwanda, Paul Kagame and his counterpart in Cameroon, have reshuffled their military ranks, retired some commanders and generals in the army, just to be sure that they, put things in place not to be next on the line and next on the list of African countries that their presidents have been ousted. But how far-reaching can this approach be if we do not go down to handle the main issue that is the problem of our continent, leadership? And we do hope that this does not become a cancer that spreads and eats deeper into the fabric of the continent. But at this point, we're going to go straight now to the front pages of the national dailies, and let's look at what the newspapers have for us as headliners this morning. Stay with us. Daily Spotlight this morning bring you information from the front pages of the national dailies. Let's take a first swipe to Nigerian Tribune and see what's on the front pages for us this morning. Of course, the coup will make a plethora of stories. Gabon coup is the big story there, and we see rule of law must not perish in Africa, says Tinubu. Of course, we also see here Tinubu article Makinde mourn as designer of Nigeria's flag. Akinkumi dies at 87. On the rider on the Gabon coup story, we see the president of the EU of ECOWAS, I beg your pardon, speaking with the Canadian Prime Minister and AU leaders. We also see Macron denounces epidemic of coups in Africa. US, Russia, China, others react. Military detains Bongo son named Nguema, Bongo's cousin, transitional leader. On page 6 is where we can find details of that story. We also see here son stabs father to death over 70,000 naira in Osun State, in Ogun State, I beg your pardon. Very sad story there. Page 28 is where you can find details. We also see here conflict. Red Cross records 25,000 persons missing in Northeast. Page 21 is where we can find details of that story. NSIA stakeholders partner to improve cancer treatment in Nigeria. Page 29 is where you can find the details. We also have here Lagos Blue Rail Line commences commercial operation September 4th. Page 15 is where we can see details. Lagos Assembly may reconsider 12 out of 17 rejected commissioner nominees as GAC meets Sanwo-Olu Obasa. Last story here on Nigerian Tribune says police arrest man who threatened traditionalist in Kwara. That's all we have on the front page of the Nigerian Tribune. On to Daily Trust now. Of course, big story there. Gabon coup. Contagious autocracy spreading in Africa, says Tinubu. Murik warns Nigerian military against emulating Gabonese army. Of course, everyone seems to be looking at Nigerian military, and the questions have been foisted onto them in recent days. But we do hope that that's not the story Nigeria gets to tell anytime soon. Why we overthrew Bongo, says Coupist. Coup deeply concerning, says Commonwealth. Make noise, I have been arrested. Bongo begs friends for help. Gabonese celebrate fall of Bongo's 53-year dynasty. Naira continues free fall as NNPC Afrexim $3 billion loan deal drags. We also see here man arrested for hacking 100-year-old father to death over 70,000 naira. Very pitiable story there. Monthly revenue from Abuja Kaduna train service drops from 500 million naira to 1 million naira, says NRC. Whoa. Okay, we also see here 3 months after, websites of FCTA, Education, Justice retain Bello, Adamu, Malami as ministers. Trade, humanitarian, water, women ministries too. International investors partners won't take us serious, says experts. Serious stories there. Of course, we move now to Daily Times, front page of Daily Times. Over 267 billion naira workers unremitted contributions missing. Over 267 billion naira workers unremitted contributions missing. Angry Reps Committee summons 54 CEOs, orders them to come personally. The figure is for 2019 alone. 2020 to 2023 still outstanding. Dire consequence awaits any defaulting CEO. Workers will make contributions and the CEOs of those companies will not remit them, and the numbers have risen to 267 billion naira. We also see here all communities fret over unpaid 3% funds threatening crisis. Designer of Nigerian flag, of course, Taiwa Kinkumi dies at 87. We also see here the shame of education in Edo Delta mushroom schools. Page 13 is where you can find details. As another House committee uncovers alleged 81.2 billion naira spent on planting trees. 81.2 billion naira allegedly spent on planting trees. Details can be found on page 4. Coup in Gabon, Bongo toppled, calls for protest. Page 4. That will be very insightful for the president of the country to be calling for protest to be able to guard himself as president of the nation. Well, we'll move on to there and look at the front page of the Punch newspaper this morning. And big